OneDnD promises to bring some huge changes when it releases on December 17th, and I'm both excited and slightly apprehensive as to what direction Wizards of the Coast are going to take. Today, we're going to go through a selection of the changes and what my thoughts on them are. A change that has somewhat been phased in through the Monsters of the Multiverse additional races is the flexibility to design your character with additional flavour and bonuses that match your class. In Basic 5e, the ability score increases you have are tied to your race, now species, but we'll get onto that soon. So if you wanted to be a ranger, you were somewhat tied to being an elf if you wanted to have optimal damage, or tiefling or half-elf to be a warlock, etc. In Monsters of the Multiverse, and now OneDnD, you can choose whatever race you want without being tied to certain ASIs. Instead, these are tied to your backgrounds, which are way more versatile from a roleplay perspective. You get ASIs, starting skills, and level 1 feats based on a selection of backgrounds of one that you have constructed yourself. I love the increased flexibility. Sometimes when I made a character, it felt like you had to choose between roleplay or optimization of your build. And while some people are concerned this will make optimization overshadow character background and narrative, I think that's actually further from the truth. Because you can perfectly craft a background that fits your character roleplay without being tied down by constraints. Freedom, finally! In OneDnD, race has been replaced with species, and are more focused on the unique abilities and traits that being a different species would bring, breaking away from racial stereotypes that can fuel some xenophobic narratives, thinking like all orcs or Goliaths being lumbering brutes, or all gnomes have to be bookworms. It increases diversity, removes plausibility of archaic racial stereotypes, maintains all of that features that made each species unique, like elves meditating, orcs being hardy, and halflings being lucky. Critical hits have had some significant adjustments as well, and truthfully a major nerf to spellcasters. Now, only weapons and unarmed attacks can critically hit, and only base weapon damage is doubled. This means that no magical effects, features, spells, or other sources of damage will be impacted by rolling those beautiful natural 20s. Just in case you don't realise quite how deep this runs, this means that no spells can crit. Eldritch Blast, Inflict Wounds, Big B's Hand will never deal those huge damage number hits again. Divine Smite won't be increased, no Radiant Sunbolts smacking, and even Sneak Attack won't be. Only base weapon damage. I personally am not a huge fan of this change. Yes, spell crits can deal dozens of HP and damage, but so can martial classes with all their extra attacks. This nerf was pretty unnecessary to me, as martial and spellcaster classes were pretty well evenly distributed across players. One didn't overshadow the others in my eyes. I can see this turning people away from spellcasters, as rolling a natural 20 was, rightfully, an incredibly exciting moment in any session. To change that to, yeah, it'll hit, I'll deal normal damage, is a huge blow to people who want to play spellcasters. And just the chance of critting being possible might make people lean more towards martial classes. Not only that, but if you played with rules that allowed enemies to crit, then a natural 20 spell can completely alter the way a fighter is going, and instill huge drama to an encounter. How many natural 20s are going to go from being the highlight to just another roll? Personally, I'm not going to use this rule. Spellcasters at my table and all players can be sure that when they crit, all their damage is going to be doubled, and we'll see those huge numbers come up once every blue moon again. Some people might like the predictability of combat damage, but unpredictability is the core of D&D, and to take away the impact of natural 20s for a whole combat style absolutely blows chunks. Sorry, Wizards. If you're finding this video helpful so far, please give it a thumbs up and comment any of the rule changes you think are interesting below. It helps get this video out to new audiences more than you'd know. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on future content. In 5e, spells were tied to specific classes, but in OneDnD, each spell will be grouped into either arcane, divine, or primal types, and each class will draw from one spell type. Wizards will have arcane, druids will have primal, etc. This definitely makes spell management so much simpler, because trawling and looking through the spell list case by case to see if you can learn it was a laborious task. So as long as it's properly laid out in the handbook, this is something I can really get behind. From an organisation perspective, it really works. But one concern that I have is that this broad characterisation approach might make spellcasting classes feel less unique. Since wizards and sorcerers will draw from the same spell pool, what spells are there to set them apart? I quite liked the messy Venn diagram that was spell availability, but we'll have to see how class features factor in to highlight the uniqueness of each class. In 5e, DM was law, and awarded inspiration at their discretion to give advantage on a roll. In OneDnD, certain actions will automatically grant inspiration, such as rolling a natural 20 to a maximum of 1 that you can hold, making inspiration more common, frequently used, but not hoarded for later. I'm looking at you, Baldur's Gate. I like that wizards are emphasising inspiration as a mechanic, because it can definitely go forgotten. But having set rules for how inspiration is given is limiting to what the significance of inspiration is in a given group. I, for example, give inspiration for engaging with roleplay, at significant events in a character's arc, or when they do something within their character that is somewhat challenging for them to do as a player. It's mostly about me encouraging people to be in their character, and this was discussed at session 0. In my opinion, having a discussion about what the expectations of the group are at session 0 and setting some conditions for how inspiration is given is the best way to implement it, rather than having it tied to random chance. In 5e, Exhaustion had 6 levels, each with different and increasingly harsh penalties, such as disadvantage on ability checks, half speed, etc. It was complicated, harsh, and difficult to keep track of, so it was seldom used, or if it was used, it was often forgotten about. In OneDnD, this has been massively simplified, so each level of Exhaustion imposes a flat -1 penalty to all d20 rolls, and when you reach -10, you die. This is a lot easier to keep track of, implement in game, and understand how it accumulates in death. I think this is a fantastic change, as it's so much easier for people to use, and I imagine it will be more impactful as a result, rather than people avoiding it altogether, particularly because of how complicated it was to navigate and track in the past. It might be less impactful and threatening on paper, but in reality, it will probably be more present in games, and therefore more impactful overall. It'll actually have an effect in game, rather than being a forgotten feature.